Howdy folks, today we are looking at a video I've been working on for a little bit. It's an idea I got while watching one of the Goulet Pen pencasts. And it was to make the most problematic ink, or at least that's what I was set out to try. And from personal experience, I've used a number of sheening inks, which do give you some problems here and there, as well as a couple shimmering inks, which tend to clog your pens. And so I thought to take one of the highest sheening inks and add shimmer to it using the Wearingeul glitter potions here, which, as you can see, the actual shimmer settles out of it quite quickly, and it's a mostly clear liquid otherwise. Just give that a bit of a shake and it disperses everything throughout. My main experience with sheening inks are the Diamine sheening inks that were German exclusives a while back. Skull and Roses being one of the first ones that I had heard about. I've got a few of the other ones, but this is definitely probably the more problematic of them. And then contacting Goulet support to try and get a little bit more information about inks I hadn't tried. The nitrogen was one of the ones suggested as being a high sheening ink. So I started with these two. And following the directions for the glitter potion, I added roughly a 10% amount to each of these inks in a sample vial. That way I didn't have to add shimmer to a whole bottle of ink. And then I filled each of those up in identical pens. For those of you that watch my videos, you may have seen where I showcased the glitter potion, as well as the different papers I tried to see if it helped make sheening inks show up more, which of course it does, but just trying out different papers to see which ones work the best. So these pens have been inked up since I first got the glitter potion, and I've been testing them out here and there, but honestly they've sat pretty much unused since my last video where I used these. And just like with the bottle of the glitter potion, the shimmer settles out quite quickly. So you do have to rotate them, but that's true for pretty much any shimmer ink. It never stays dispersed in the ink, and you just need to roll it around every so often while you're writing to keep it flowing through the pen more evenly. And what I found through a number of testing in different videos is that I think I actually made the sheening inks more usable, or at least lessened the effect of what sheening inks typically do with pens. And what that is because they are so saturated, they typically almost crystallize on your nib. So when you have them uncapped for a little bit, they will actually seem like they dry out quite quickly, but it's just like the teeniest tiny bit at the tip. Once you get that going again, it's good to go. And I've actually had less issues with that. And the Skull and Roses is one I'm quite familiar with. The nitrogen, less so. I can't speak from too much experience on that one because really I've only used it in this here. But the Skull and Roses, I actually had less issues with the hard starts from, writing a sentence and pausing for just a moment to go to maybe the next line, and then you kind of have to get it going again. So these have been sitting for quite a while. I actually am not sure if they will write. This one does not. That one does. So honestly, the only issues I ran into with these, I never had one of them actually completely clog up from the shimmer or dry out, other than sitting for an excessively long period of time, capped even, but most pens will dry out over a long period of time. The only issue I had is pretty much universal for shimmer inks, which is where the shimmer builds up in the feed, and eventually you just kind of stop getting shimmer out the end of your pen, and after a little bit of time you get a big giant blob of all the shimmer all at once. Since we did have one of these that still wrote and one that was dried out, I can use that as a example to show how I usually get these restarted, especially with sheening inks, which I do like a lot, but I write quite slow personally, and I'll stop and kind of think about things, so it's pretty common that I'll have the pen dry out just from sitting there for 30 seconds or so. So, no writing. This is just a paper towel that I got wet with some water. It's got some ink from my fingers there, and I'll usually just kind of touch it to it, both sides. That will wipe off any ink that has kind of dried up or crystallized on the end of the pen. That'll also kind of absorb back into the feed and dilute any ink that has kind of super saturated from sitting and drying out. You can also just dip it down in a little dish of water if that's easier, run it under the tap, and that's usually enough to get it writing again, which of course that did get us going again. Switching to a more top-down view to get a better look. The pink pen here. Which, based on the color there, is going to be the Skull and Roses. And the lighter color here is going to be the Nitrogen, which is in this pen here. Now that I've actually wrote with them, it's much easier to tell which one's which. The Rhodia paper here doesn't actually give you too much sheen. But I also noticed adding even that small amount of the glitter potion actually does lessen the amount of sheen you get by a fair amount. It does add the glitter, but it's, to me, I actually like the sheening ink more than the glitter, as the sheening can cause problems as far as you're writing, you give it a second and it dries out, touch it to some wet paper towel and you're good to go, where the glitter, it actually gets in the feed pretty much forever unless you're willing to take everything apart and toothbrush out all the little fins there, and even then you'll probably still find a bit of glitter down the road. So what I set out to do was to take two highly sheening inks, the ability to add as much glitter as you want, although I did follow kind of the recommendations, as of course if you add a ton of glitter, it's not going to write at all. And what I found is it really didn't make it any worse than either ink or a normal shimmer ink would be normally. And I lost a fair amount of the sheen, and honestly it was just kind of a disappointing test all around. So what I would be interested in is if you have picked up some of the glitter potion and tried it with a high sheening ink such as the Nitrogen, Skull and Roses, pretty much any of the Organic Studios are fairly high sheen from what I understand. And if you got the same results as me, where the sheen was lessened on the ink, and honestly it wrote more easily than I would typically expect for a high sheening ink. So if that happens to be you, definitely leave me a comment down below. I'd be interested in hearing your experience as well. It's one of those things I can test it myself, but I've got mainly these two. I've got a few more of the German exclusive sheening inks, but the Skull and Roses is definitely the highest sheening out of the ones I picked up. I've also got the Purple Rain, and I can't remember what the green one's called, but I've got that as well.